The Leadville 100 is first and foremost a mountain bike race. Flat bars, knobby tires, suspension. There's no doubt that this race favors that style of riding. But there are a few things we borrow from the roadie world.
And one of them will likely be your helmet. You know, I love my laser jackal with its adjustable visor, but it's not what I'd recommend for you, Fatty, or anyone doing the Leadville 100. Now, for this race, you want to choose one of Laser's sleeker and lighter options, likely the new redesigned Z1 with Kineticore.
Yeah, I love my Jackal too, but I always go with road-style helmets at this mountain bike race. Recently, it's been my bright orange Laser that you can see as I come out of the trees off Columbine, but thanks to the vagaries of disappearing luggage, I am due for something new, and the Z1 has caught my eye.
Yeah, the Z1 is now 40 grams lighter than the previous version. Laser also has replaced MIPS with its Kineticore anti-rotational system. And here's a claim that almost seems too good to be true, but Laser says the vents on the Z1 actually do a slightly better job of cooling than wearing no helmet at all.
That is cool. Haha. The Z1 comes in 6 colors, which is good considering I will be needing a new color helmet this year. More on that soon. Laser is part of Shimano's family, which is why we are mentioning them here, and you can check out the entire Laser lineup at lasersport.us.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race presented by Shimano. It is Season 7, Episode 3 of the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, and freaks you out for the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. I'm Michael Houghton, hottie to most.
And I'm Fatty, and on this episode, we are talking spinners and mashers and everything in between, and how you should be thinking about cadence in your prep for the Leadville 100.
Coach Hunter Allen, who's worked with Jeremiah Bishop and dozens of Leadville athletes, will help us cover the most basic yet very important part of riding, and that is pedaling. Trust us, it's more than just turning your cranks.
And here comes Eldon Nelson with 14 minutes to spare on that clock. The bragging rights and the heavy hardware, that's all you. Welcome back to your Leadville family and your finish line.
Fatty's Finishing Tips, our regular segment this season that helps Leadville racers reach that red carpet.
Yeah, today's tip is pretty simple, or it seems simple on its face. Don't overburden yourself. Remember, in this big race, you are never more than 15 miles from an aid station. And that is actually only between the start and finish line and the Carter aid station. After that, you're never more than 10 miles from an aid station. Hottie, every year I see people at the starting line with full hydration packs and water in both bottles, which means they are carrying 5 to 7 pounds of fluid up Keevans, up Hagerman, and up Sugarloaf. Now, I get it. Most of us don't plan to stop at Carter's outbound. I never have. And in fact, it has been more than a decade since I have stopped at Pipeline outbound. But a lot of us pack as if we don't have the option to stop at those places. So my tip today is remember the aid station safety net when you fill your pack or bottles for the start of the day. Fill your bottles or hydration pack as if the day is going to be cool, and you are not going to need a half gallon of water in the first 25 miles. And if it turns out you do need more water than you expected, it is truly never far away. You've got refill options at miles 15, 25, 40, 43, 50, 57, 60, 75, and 90. Literally, that often. Water is heavy. Don't carry it up climbs that you don't have to. And this is true even more as the race progresses. As you feel more fatigued, carrying excessive fluid up big climbs is harder and harder.
Yeah, it's the mountain biker's reflex, right? We always go out on our rides just anticipating that there's not going to be water out there, but when indeed at Leadville there is. So specifically, how much water do you generally start the day with?
Yeah, I start the day with 2 bottles, 2 largish bottles, both which fit in the cages of my medium-sized frame. Generally, that will get me to Twin Lakes Dam alternate outbound, 42 miles into the race. Now, I know that if the day is running warm or I'm running hot, I've got a whopping 3 refill opportunities before I see you at my actual planned stop. Again, water is heavy. Don't carry so much that you keep showing up at your planned stops with full or half full bottles or hydration packs.
I think the one important exception to the rule is the refill at pipeline inbound. You're roughly 80 miles into the race when you refill there. And while it's only 10-ish miles to Carter, wow, that 10 miles is tough. You got the massive 4-mile climb up Power Line, and then the monster 3-mile paved climb up to around Turquoise Lake before you get to Carter. Plus, you're incredibly fatigued at that point.
You are. Time should be the key factor in how much water you plan to carry, not distance. I carry more water out of pipeline inbound than anywhere else in the race. It is truly the only part of the race where I ride with both a pack and a bottle.
All right, funny thing about looking at bikes, for some reason, our eyes go right to the frame. And for good reason. That's where most of the logos are. The beautiful tube shapes are there. The fancy paint also lives on the frame. But what we should really be focusing on are those wheels.
No. And now, while not necessarily as aesthetically pleasing, the wheels are where much of the performance in your bike lies. That's why we've teamed up with, and hope that you do as well, with Envy. Look up the word performance, and at least in the dictionary we use, you find the word Envy right there. The whole line is performance first, and especially their wheels.
When it comes to Leadville, it's Envy's M525, a high-performance XC wheel that is up for Leadville. Light, fast, rides good, can handle the punishment of the Goat Trail or Power Line, and Sugarloaf descents. Hookless speed, high engaging hub, built by hand in Ogden, Utah.
Yeah, it is the wheels that I ride all the time. And I think you should too. Next time you are looking at a bike, make sure you take a good hard look at the wheels. If the decals say Envy, you know that that is a company that puts the rider and performance first. You can look at Envy wheels too. Buy a set while you're at it by going to Envy, that's ENVE.com.
We have been big fans of DNA Custom Cycling for years and years. They're, in fact, the only company we've ever entrusted with making our T-shirts and jerseys. I believe we've done, 4 different kits and T-shirt designs with them over the years. The most recent came out in Season 5 of this show.
Yep, and now you can make that 6 jerseys and T-shirts, Audie, because right now we're incredibly excited to announce 2 beautiful Leadville Podcast jerseys and 1 awesome new T-shirt. This year, we wanted to focus on the famous elevation profile of the race, and the 2 beautiful designs we've got really nail the extraordinary look and all the climbs of this race.
Yeah, whether you're looking for a bright jersey that stands out in the crowd or something a little more stealth, we've got you covered.
Yep. Head on over to leadville.fm/jersey to check both of these jerseys out. And please pre-order them anytime during the month of March. They're going to arrive in time for you to ride throughout the season and during the big race. And we guarantee anyone who recognizes the Leadville race profile will get the message behind your jersey.
And everyone else, we just think it's a very cool looking kit. But I have to say, Fatty, the thing I'm most excited about this year is the new T-shirt we've got for our listeners. The front is retro with an audio cassette, podcast theme. Remember audio cassettes? We didn't go CD here. We went audio cassettes. So we're going way back, along with a nod to the elevation profile.
Yep, the elevation profile, front and center, quite literally. And the back is the podcast tagline that Hottie's been saying each episode for this show for close to 140 episodes now, which, as it turns out, is also a pretty great description of the race itself. You can find and pre-order that shirt right now at leadville.fm/t-shirt.
And it's worth saying neither Fatty nor I are anything close to designers, so we can't take credit for the look of these jerseys or T-shirts.
Nope, that is all down to the magic of DNA Cycling. We gave them an idea, they gave us some options, and then we refined and iterated with them till we arrived at looks that we genuinely love. And we think you're going to love them too.
Of course, some folks are going to want to design their own jerseys, and DNA can help you in the same way it did for us. From design to orders to delivery, check out dnacycling.com.
But also, buy our jersey and T-shirt at leadville.fm/jersey. We've counted the miles, we've estimated the watts per kilogram, we've totaled the calories needed to finish the Leadville 100. But have you ever stopped to think how many pedal strokes would it take to reach the red carpet? Like tens of thousands, I think.
Which is why, for the first time on this show, we are getting into cadence and pedaling technique. Sounds boring, but hey, you got to turn the pedals just to get away from 6th and Harrison. To help us find our ideal cadence and improve our pedaling stroke, we have Coach Hunter Allen. Because so many coaches lean on him for how to train cyclists, Allen is called the coach's coach, and he's here to help mashers and spinners alike perfect their pedaling. Again, we welcome to the show Coach Hunter Allen. He runs Peaks Coaching Group. He's been around for a long time, folks. This is somebody worth listening to. In addition, he wrote the book. He literally wrote the book on training with power and racing with power. We're going to get to that later. Tell us your Leadville experience. Do you have personal experience with Leadville or athletes? I imagine you've had athletes who've raced it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks. First off, thanks for having me on the podcast. This is super exciting, and I'm really glad to be here. But no, I've never raced it myself. I have coached many athletes for it, and recently one of the ones that I coach, Tara Kelly, she's won I think the 34-39 age group, and then just recently won the 40 to 44 age group as well. So she's a really great mountain biker. So coached lots of folks for it. And I've done a lot of ultra endurance mountain biking myself. I've done La Ruta in Costa Rica 3 times. I did Trans-Portugal across the entire length of Portugal. And then I did the Machu Picchu Epic in Peru as well. So I've done a ton of mountain biking. Just never have gotten to the Leadville yet.
Well, we welcome you out. Anytime you want to come out, it's certainly there for you. We'd love to see you there someday. So regarding cadence and pedaling, I've heard it said that cadence is almost like this personal thing, like it's built into you. Some of us are mashers, like Fatty's a masher. He's a low cadence guy, right? He just probably, Fatty, 60 RPM is
That's my top end, yes.
Yeah, that's his top end. And of course, some of us are spinners. I'm more of a spinner. And I've also heard, Coach, that training, at least to become a spinner, can be quite time-consuming and very hard to do. So what are your thoughts on this area about whether cadence is built into us and how trainable is it?
Right. Yeah. So this is a really great topic because it is something, like you said, so basic to cycling, but then at the same time, it is got some incredible complexities involved with it as well. So first off, cadence, when you first start cycling, so when you begin cycling as a cyclist in that first year or two, you don't really have the muscular proprioception to relax and contract your muscles in the circular motion of the pedaling motion that we do in a speedy way, right? So that first year, you're really kind of teaching your muscles how to contract in this concentric motion. So that's a really important thing to keep in the back of your mind for the beginning riders. And when they first start out, their natural cadence is 60 or 70 RPM because they can't pedal faster than that or their legs burn because of that. Now, as you kind of pass that stage and you get into more, okay, wow, I've been doing this for a few years now, then the muscle fiber type of the athlete is really critical. So, Fatty, you're probably with a little slower cadence, a little more of a masher, you probably have more fast twitch muscles. You want to rely on the strength of those muscles versus shifting the stress to the cardiovascular system. Now, Hadi, you probably have the opposite side where you're, okay, gosh, I've got more slow twitch muscles, so I can spin faster with less force and put more of the stress on my cardiovascular system. And so it's and it doesn't make sense, right? It's like, okay, wait a minute, I'm a fast twitcher, but I like pedaling slow. What? Right? Or I'm a slow twitcher, but I like pedaling fast. That doesn't make sense. But what it really is it's the fact that the fast twitchers, they have more muscular mass, right? Just more mass and more force they can create. And so therefore they want to use that force. And then the slow twitchers, gosh, thin, tall, thin, skinny muscles, wow, we don't have that muscular strength. So we need to rely on the cardiovascular system so we can just pedal faster. And then that's where that is. Now, to your question of, is that trainable or is that something you can change? It is certainly trainable and changeable to an extent. Okay. So there is going to be a place like, gosh, if you spent all winter long or 6 months really focusing on doing fast pedaling drills, 100, 110, 120 RPM, and put some serious time in, you would be able to train those muscles to relax and contract at a faster rate. Now, would you ever feel comfortable at 100 RPM? Probably not, right? But you might feel really comfortable now at 85 or 90, okay? So that's where that is. Now, Hadi, on your side, though, the problem is you would have to add muscle mass, right? You would have to get in the weight room. You would have to drink tons of protein shakes, et cetera. and you may have the body type that just doesn't put on muscle mass, right? I mean, you may just never put on muscle mass, no matter how many raw eggs you drink, or whatever, right? So it is changeable to a certain extent, but then there's the genetic component that comes in.
Mm-hmm. So tell us why it's worth it to do this training, both to get the additional power so that you have the power for the slow cadence in your quiver, as well as for folks like me who tend to gravitate toward a slow cadence, big ring, efforts, why we need to work on having the high cadence option available as well.
First off, cycling is the first thing that we do when we start training with a power meter in any part of cycling, and whatever that is, whatever discipline it is, whether it's mountain biking, road riding, gravel riding, cyclocross, whatever, the first thing we have to do is define the demands of the event. So that's the very first thing we do. What are the event demands? And so we look at that in a big picture to begin with. Okay, gosh, we're going to ride 100 miles. We're going to be at elevation. We're going to go over these mountains. It's going to take this long to do it. So we define those basic demands, and then we start kind of coming down to this micro level and say, okay, well, what does that mean? Okay, so if I'm going to climb up this mountain, and this is going to be an hour and a half, 2 hours long climb, and traction is going to be a factor, elevation is going to be a factor, et cetera, then I'm going to have to pedal at a certain RPM in order to, one, not fall over and keep moving, right? And I've got to be able to have the cardiovascular system to do that as well. Secondly, then what about all those downhills and flats and stuff? So then that may be where, man, I'm going to be spinning my brains out on the downhills just because I don't have enough gearing because I needed those big gears for the uphills. So in all of cycling, when we look at it, whether you're a mountain biker or a road racer or whatever it is, we have these, it's one of the fun things about cycling, to be honest, right, is there's incredible changes in cadence that we have to make. Now, in our little world, we think, oh gosh, 60 RPM, 90 RPM, that's a huge difference. But in reality, it's like, it's tiny, right? I mean, engines in Formula One cars go 10,000 RPM. We're talking about 30 RPM on our little engines. So they're really small changes, but there is this kind of idea of what do I need to do for this kind of event. And so I think that's where this is really unique in Leadville. And we have to think about well, gosh, what are the event demands for Leadville? And then we start to come back to that.
As far as Leadville goes, Coach, it has a lot of high force, low cadence. In other words, you're going to be grinding, right? That's a majority of what's out there, and I think people really focus a lot of what they do on those long climbs because they know that's the big deal there at Leadville. But like Fatty said, there are early in the morning, there's a fast downhill where you are probably going to be spun out as well. So take us through when you do have kind of these, opposing cadence demands. How do you get the athlete prepared to handle both?
Great. Yeah. Great question. And that's something that we have to address. Again, back to these kind of, perfect, here's the event demands. Now let's go and train the athlete. So two things. Number one, I think that we always have to do, these big gear type intervals. Okay. So I call them tractor pulls. I'm from the South. We got tractors. We go tractor pulls, right? But no, but what it is, and let me back up a little bit, and kind of do a little bit of myth busting before I go into the tractor pulls. But I'll introduce this. So there is this myth in cycling, and it's been around for a long time, and I jokingly refer to it as the 1950s Italian cycling coach myth, where, 1950s, they said, if you want to be a stronger rider, then you have to push a bigger gear all the day long. And so, that's what they thought in the 1950s, the 60s and 70s, that like, gosh, if you want to be really strong, then you just need to push a big gear really strong, hard, but slow. And these guys would go out and ride at 50 RPM for 5 hours. The problem with that is, and this is where the beauty of a power meter came along, is we started to be able to define, well, what does that mean? Like, what is true strength? Okay. So when we think of strength, we think of it in, the weight room, right? Gosh, I can go in the weight room and I can leg press 1,000 pounds. That's a lot of strength, right? Or I can go in the weight room and leg press 100 pounds. Not so much, right? So we think of it from that perspective. So when we create power, when we create watts on the mountain bike, then we produce power, and in order to create strength, we have to basically create a very high stress situation for the muscle to improve and get stronger. Right. So you wouldn't go in the weight room and say, okay, gosh, you know what? I've got this goal. I'm going to leg press 1,000 pounds. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to leg press 100 pounds, but I'm going to do it 1,000 times every day on lunch break. Right. You're never going to leg press 1,000 pounds, right? In order to leg press 1,000 pounds, we have to progressively work up to it. So then all of a sudden you're basically giving the demands to the muscle, saying, we want to produce strength. We want to grow this muscle further stronger. At 50 RPM, you're now basically, you're not at 100 pounds leg press, right? You're maybe at 200 pounds. So yes, you are above the 100-pound normal, right? But you're still not creating enough strength to actually ever leg press 1,000 pounds. So, this story, now we come back to the tractor pulls, right? So this is where the myth we have to bust. It's like, gosh, how do I get better at producing more power? Well, and be stronger to doing that. Well, gosh, you have to go and do tractor pulls. You've got to do stuff where you're going to put it in the biggest gear you've got, okay? Smallest cog in the back, big chain ring in the front, whatever you've got. Slow down to 5 miles an hour or less. Tighten your abdominals. Grab the handlebars, stay seated, and you push this gear for about 30 seconds or until you get to about 90 RPM. And once you're at 90, now you're back to leg pressing 200 pounds or maybe even 100 pounds or 50 pounds, not creating enough stress. So that's what we think of when we think of strength, right? You need to have strength. So now bring that full circle and say, okay, well, back to the demands of the event. Well, gosh, you need strength to be able to push that gear, to grind it up the hill. But then, well, gosh, this is a long climb. I've got to do this for a long period of time. So now we come back and say, well, you know what? That Italian cycling coach, actually what he said back in the 1950s is going to apply as well, right? Because you've got to do both for the demands of Leadville. So you need to have time where you go out and you do just leg press 200 pounds for maybe not 5 hours, but for an hour or two, so you can get ready for the fact that I'm going to have to produce power at a slower RPM going up this hill. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And then, as I recall from my training, we would do those high force drills earlier in the season. And then as we get into the meat of our training, we would back off on those. Is that when you start introducing higher cadence work, or how do you strike that balance to getting the athlete to kind of cover their bases?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's first off, so for me, I recommend that most of my athletes do 12 weeks of weight training in the off season. Now, I do that because, number one, it's a great way to prevent overuse injury during the season. I mean, we're a weird bunch of people, right? I mean, we're hunched over. We never straighten our legs. Our shoulders are rounded in. Our neck is craned back, right? We've got all these crazy, kind of imbalances that we create from hours riding on the bike. So I think it's really important in the off season to do some weight training to kind of harmonize the body and balance it. I don't think that, it's not like, my functional threshold power is going to go up because I did a bunch of weights this winter. It doesn't really work that way, but it is important to do that. So the way that we have to then transition this strength into the pedaling motion is through those big gear tractor pulls, starting, end of January, into February, even into March. Now, when you start to get to kind of the March timeframe, then you're now saying, okay, we don't want to lose our ability to have a high cadence either. So you're peppering that in through the winter, but then you're kind of tapering some of those big gear intervals off in the March timeframe, doing a little more of the speed changes of cadence, higher cadence type drills in that period of time.
Take us through a sample of a high cadence workout.
Sure. One of my favorite is super simple, and anybody can do it. It's just 10 times 1 minutes. You do 1 minute at 100 to 120 RPM, and I build up. Okay, I would do the first week at 100 RPM, then I do the second week at 105, then I try and do 110 and build up to 120. You do it for a minute, and then in between you ride at 80 RPM in between for a minute, and that's all you do. Don't worry about your wattage, right? Your wattage needs to be really low, all right? Not really low, but low, all right? Because you're focusing on the cadence. That's one of my favorite ones. It's simple. It's easy to do. Another great one is just a pyramid. Let's start out and we'll do a minute at 90 RPM, a minute at 95, and you're taking a minute rest in between each one at 80 RPM, minute at 95, and then a minute at 100, 105, 110, 120, try and get to 125, and then come back down and do a little pyramid that way. That's also a really great one to do. So super simple kind of things, but if you do them consistently, they, all of a sudden you start to get used to them.
I want to ask you a little bit about time to benefit, because a lot of our listeners are doing Leadville for the first time or maybe the second time. And you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that you don't just naturally have the ability to turn a nice, perfect circle, that it takes a while to get there. I expect that what you are describing, both in terms of tractor pulls and then the pyramids for these, the high cadence, that over time it produces value and you get better. I remember in my first Leadville 100, I did about a 10 hours, 40 minutes. Next year I came back and was an hour faster just because I had more experience on the bike, right? I had learned to turn a decent pedal stroke. I don't think that is super abnormal. I think that as we get experienced, all else being equal, fitness being equal, we get faster. I'm wondering with what you were prescribing, both in terms of increasing power and increasing cadence, how is it possible in your first year at Leadville for this to have an improvement? Or is it something that you've got to take a little bit longer of a look down the road?
So I think that if if you start soon enough, right, you need to give yourself time. Like our fitness changes occur in generally 6 to 8 week cycles. Okay. So, what we did 8 weeks ago is impacting your fitness right now. All right. So for everybody listening, look at the date right now. What you did 8 weeks ago is impacting your fitness now. Now, of course, we've got years of stuff that's behind that. But if you stop training 8 weeks ago, you're not going to be that fit right now. But if you train really hard 8 weeks ago and all through that period of time, then you're going to be much fitter. So we look at these things in 8 week cycles to really change, and from my experience, I've seen if you have 3 8 week cycles of getting in this kind of cadence work, and that's twice a week. Right. And it's not like, oh, wow, I'm going to go out and do a 2-hour session and just do cadence. No, you're going out and doing your 2-hour ride or a 3-hour ride or whatever it is. And you do, 10 times 1 minute at fast pedaling. You do some tractor pulls. You do your FTP intervals. You're getting some work in there, 20 to 30 minutes twice a week. And if it's your goal, especially like for you, Fatty, like, oh, wow, I want to improve my cadence so that I spin a little bit more quickly, then, okay, you need to just be conscious of it when you're riding. And every time you see that number on your bike computer, you're like, okay, get it up, change gears, get it up, change gears. And so that starts to help.
Coach, like we said, the most basic of bike functions is pedaling the thing. We all seem to figure it out right away. We put our feet on the pedals and around go the cranks. But I want to take a moment to talk just about pedaling technique. Will drills like the ones you prescribed improve my technique, or is that something separate I need to focus on?
Right. So pedaling technique is really another area that's very interesting. It's been fairly well studied. And this is one of these things that's also what's the word? It's not a myth necessarily, but it's just misunderstood in some ways. A lot of people think that we need to pedal in this circle. We're producing power on the upstroke. We're pulling up on the upstroke. And there are times when you have to do that. I can think of, going up a very steep hill, right? With poor traction, you're using the upstroke to help you keep that traction. You can be in a muddy situation or a low traction situation where you have to do that. So there are definitely times when you do that. Now, however, the science says that the best cyclists in the world just push harder on the downstroke. They don't really pull up on the upstroke. And there's even a couple of studies that say not only do they not pull up on the upstroke, but when people purposely pull up on the upstroke, then they're metabolically inefficient, meaning that they're actually using more energy to try and go faster, and it's not translating to any meaningful speed increase. They're just using more energy. So that's really important to know. So what do we do then, right? So first off, the couple of things that you need to think about when you do this is, number one, what you're trying to do is get back to the power phase of the stroke faster. Okay, so I want to get back to 0 to 180 so I can get from 0 to 180, on the crank arms faster. How can I get there faster? And you need to kind of take some of these things in blocks, right? So when you do work at this, it takes mental focus, it takes intention, and it's very difficult to do for more than 5 minutes at a time. So for everybody listening here, I want to make sure that when you do these kind of drills, just do them for 5 minutes, stop and pedal normally for 10 minutes, and then do them again for 5 minutes. Because if you try and do them for 30 minutes, you're going to be like thinking about all kinds of stuff. Your brain can't handle that. All right. I know mine can't. I can barely handle a minute. Okay. So what you're doing is you're going to visualize and use your intention to drive your knee to the handlebar. Okay. By by driving your knee to the handlebar, what that does is that contracts the quadricep at a sooner place on the pedal stroke. So that way we can start to get on the power phase as we go across the top of the pedal stroke, increasing the range that you're producing power. So sometimes, and I've seen this in lots of pedal strokes, people won't even get onto the power phase. They won't even start producing meaningful power till about 2 o'clock on the pedal stroke. And it's like, wow, they're only producing power from 2 to 5. It's a tiny little window. Whereas, gosh, if I'm starting to produce meaningful power out here at 12 or 12:30, and I can produce power all the way around to 5 or 5:30, then I've got more range that I am producing power longer period of time that I can make higher watts. Your goal in the upstroke is get the leg out of the way. Just get the leg out of the way. Just get the leg out of the way, right? The hip flexors, right? The muscles in the front of your hips, they're just trying to get out of the way. You're not trying to contract them necessarily. You're trying to get them out of the way. And so that's a really important point to do this. So think of that. Another thing you can do to help a little bit is, and this works very well with newer cyclists, is scrape the mud off the bottom of your foot. Okay. That helps the bottom of the pedal stroke to get around that pedal stroke. I kind of go back and forth. I use that with beginner cyclists, and then if they've kind of gotten that dialed, then immediately transition them into drive the knee to the handlebar as fast as you can. Now, one other thing related to this before you ask another question, because I know you're about to, because this is a good one, is how do you orient your foot? Okay. So a lot of people, again, well, what is my foot supposed to be flat? Is my foot supposed to be toe down? Is my foot supposed to be heel down? How do I orient my foot as I pedal? And so this idea of ankling, where you kind of rotate your foot around the pedal stroke, that is total bunk. I mean, that you use so much energy doing that, and you don't produce any more power, and probably produce less power that way. The goal of your pedal stroke and what your calf muscles really do is they hold the foot in place. They're keeping that foot in place. Now, it's going to move a little bit, right? Your calf muscles have to move because your calf muscles are the pump to get the blood back from the feet, back from the legs, back up to the body. So they really work as a pump. They're really important. And that's why, they say all the time, if you take a plane flight, gosh, you need to get up, you need to stand up, you need to do toe raises, get the blood out of your legs, get it back, get it pumped back, get that venous blood pumped back up into your heart to get more oxygen and come back again. So when we think of it that way, so it moves a little bit, but I want you to kind of now visualize this, right? So let's say we're playing basketball. All right. You're standing, ways from me. I've got a basketball. We're bouncing the basketball on the floor. It hits the ground, and then you catch it after the bounce. Now, if I put reverse spin on that basketball and it spins backwards and I let it hit the floor, then it bounces, and it may not even get to you. It may just go straight up in the air. Okay. What if I then take forward spin and spin that basketball forward and then bounce on the floor? It gets to you faster. So by pedaling with your toe down just a little bit, 10 to 15 degrees, we're not talking a lot, but just down a little bit, you're continually putting forward spin on the basketball, right? So you're never slowing yourself down. You're never putting your brakes on during the pedal cycle. So that's really the optimal way to create the most force with the least energy, right? You're economical.
Hey, Fatty, I've been trying out a new gel now available at the feed, and this one may have the best name going. In big, bold letters on the gel pack, it simply says carbs. Fatty, there's no guessing what you'll get with this gel.
No, carbs is carbs, and it is a lot of them. A single pack has a whopping 50 grams of carbs. That is about 200 calories. I've had a few of these during hard trainer sessions, and actually out on a long fat bike ride yesterday, and I like them. I'm not looking for a treat when I eat a gel. I'm looking to get as much fuel as I can, as fast as I can, so I can get back to the hard work of breathing. With carbs, I am getting exactly that. The flavor is clean. The digestion is cleaner. They go down easily. I'm liking them a lot.
Me too. Carbs is a quick and painless way to get that 50-gram shot of carbs. The ratio is 2-to-1 glucose to fructose, which is what most nutritionists agree is about the right amount to get proper absorption. Other than the sugars, carbs has a little sodium to help keep those levels on track.
Now, we are not going to be saying that a carbs gel is right for you, just like we would never say a saddle is right for you. But with all that we have gathered, we think there is a good chance it will be. So get some carbs fuel in your next feed order and see if you agree with Hadi and me. Claim your $80 annual credit at thefeed.com/Leadville. Register your email, verify your phone number, and then spend your first feed credit of $20 right away.
Okay, back to our pedaling and cadence discussion with Coach Hunter Allen.
Let's focus a little bit more about gear. So 2 parts here. The first thing is, as you were talking about cadence and the stroke, my mind naturally went to oval chain rings. There's a lot of talk about those right now. I'm wondering, with what you're describing, is there value in going to an oval ring for an endurance race or for any training for that matter?
That's very, very astute. Excellent question. So there is value to that for some people. Okay, so for the people who don't produce power on the pedal stroke soon enough, an oval chain ring will force them to do that. And so that's the key. Now, you can imagine, right? Like I said, okay, they're at 12 o'clock and they're not producing power till 2 o'clock or maybe even 2:30. Then that's something that is like, wow, you're just leaving a lot of stuff on the table here. So for those kind of people, they really need to use oval chain rings, and then they can rotate them so that it forces them to be on the power phase of this pedal stroke at 12 or 12:30. So that's really good. Now, the other thing that oval chain rings help with is when your bike is at an angle. All right. So think about, when our bike is flat, right, perfectly horizontal, we're pedaling, in this perfect phase straight down from 0 to 180. And then when our bike goes up, now we're pedaling in a different way, right? Our bike is oriented differently. We're using different muscles. We're using more hamstrings now a little bit, right? It's difficult to keep that toe down, right? Because now you're on a hill, right? So you can't keep toe down. So you're actually, just your natural pedal stroke is to be a little heel down. But now you're pedaling in a different range of motion as well. So then oval chain rings can make a difference when you have lots of long climbs like you do in Leadville. So that could be a thing. Now, how do I know if I'm that person? No, that's the next question. How do I know? It's difficult to know. There is a device out there called the Leomo. Leomo. I worked with them for 4 years to develop this device. It has inertial motion or units that you put on your foot, on the toe of your foot, and they can measure your dead spots around your pedal stroke. And so it's really unique. It hasn't caught on as much as it should have. I really wanted it to and worked really hard with this company. They have an office in Boulder, actually, and they've done a really great job with that part of it. That's a really unique part. You can see where you have a dead spot in your pedal stroke. And so, oh, wow, look, this person doesn't produce power from 0 to 2. This person produces power from 12 all the way to 6. Holy cow. So that's the only scientific way to really know, besides, maybe doing a little bit of slow motion video, right? You could have somebody on a trainer. I've done that before where, okay, let's use my phone. I'm going to do slow motion video of them. And you can start to see how their foot comes across the top of the pedal stroke and then what they're doing with the foot as it goes down the pedal stroke. And if it's like this thing is just floating until it gets to 3, it's really obvious, especially if you see their muscles contract. So that's the poor man's way to do it.
Chain rings are a big topic at Leadville. In fact, Coach Hunter, you'll see a lot of racers go obviously smaller in size. We see 30s, a lot of 28s out there. And we also know that I think crank lengths, I think the trend is going shorter. So to me, that says everything is leaning to higher cadence. Does it say anything to you about how these athletes should be getting ready?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a big deal, right? Is that if people are forcing themselves into higher cadence situations, then absolutely they've got to train them. So if you're going with a shorter crank, if you're going with a smaller front chain ring, then you better be able to spin. And so that's going to be something you absolutely have to practice. I think that's part of it. The crank length thing is really interesting. Because there's a ton of research around crank length, and Dr. Jim Martin in Utah is probably the expert in the world on crank length, and so he's done so much research on there. And basically, he said that crank length really doesn't matter; it just matters that you're used to it. So if you're used to 175 millimeter cranks, then that's the best crank length for you. If you're used to 145 millimeter cranks, that's the best crank length for you. Now, that's what, in terms of producing the most power. Okay. So you have to kind of put that caveat in there, what the right crank length is. Now, obviously, leg length, all this stuff is a huge factor. I know some very prominent bike fitters in the United States that basically, if they have anybody who comes into their studio that has knee pain and they're over 50 years old, he immediately puts them on crank lengths that are much smaller. And the reason being is because then the top of the pedal stroke, the knee is not so acutely bent. So now you're keeping the angle from the lower leg to the upper leg at less of an acute angle. And that almost always alleviates a lot of knee pain. So that's one of the reasons why we see shorter crank lengths going on, especially for riders over the age of 50. And then for other reasons too, there's some other reasons too. So yeah.
I want to bring this to me for a second. I can't help but talk a little bit about me. So I'm not super unique in that I have been primarily a standing climber for decades, right? I don't even think about it. When the climb begins, I am standing and I am rowing. I don't think about it any more than when than you might think to shift gears or lock out your fork. Is this a bad practice?
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. I think that every cyclist should know how to climb and be seated and be able to do it for an extended period of time. The athletes that I coach who are specifically doing Leadville and other events like this that have extended climbing in them, I have them do 20 and 30-minute climbs where they stand the entire time. Right. You're not allowed to sit down. You got to do this entire climb, standing, right? Because it teaches them to, one, learn how to relax while standing, right? So there's absolutely a way to kind of straighten your body up, get your body forward on the bicycle so your hips are closer to your stem, not quite lock out your shoulders, but close to it, and lock out your arms close to it, and then allow the body weight to fall on the pedals. Okay, so that's a huge advantage, right? And that's why we see riders who or excel at climbing and standing. You can watch their form. Wow, their body is more forward on the bike. They're letting their body fall on the pedals. They're getting another 20 or 30 watts just from their body weight falling on the pedals. And when you learn how to then relax there, you're not using any more oxygen than you would being seated. And you have another option. Now it's like, oh man, well, I can sit down if I need to. I can stand up if I need to, right? It's just another tool in your toolbox. So I think that's a great thing. I mean, that's outstanding.
Of course, there's times to put out power into, really into stand and grind it out, to sit and grind it out. But there are parts of this race that unless you are, really almost a sub 8 racer, an 8:15, 8:30 racer, you are going to be either at the threshold of needing to get off and walk, or you're going to need to actually get off and walk. And I'm thinking about, there are parts where many people in the very first climb going up Kevins need to get off and walk. There are, of course, most people have to get off for parts of Columbine. Almost everyone has to get off for part of Powerline on the way back. When do you make that decision? Right there, when is it not worth it to stay on your bike?
Right. Yeah. And I think that depends. That's a little bit of an individual decision. I think that some of it is traction related. And then some of it is just purely speed related, right? It's kind of like, gosh, I am now at 2 miles an hour. I can walk at the speed. and I'm struggling to maintain traction at 2 miles an hour on this hill. This is silly. Get off and walk, and just push your bike. So I think that those two are the main components to it. I mean, the problem with when we look at heart rate at elevation, your heart rate's going to be suppressed, right? So it's a very difficult metric in Leadville to spend a lot of time on unless you've been at elevation for a while and you know how your heart responds. It's like, oh gosh, my threshold heart rate at sea level for me personally is 163, 165, right? I go to elevation, it's going to be, and it depends on the elevation, right? I mean, 135, 142, maybe something like in that range. So, your heart rate is like, gosh, I'm maxed, and you're maxed, you're breathing hard, you're at your ventilatory threshold when you're going, you're panting. It's like, hey, just jump off your bike, take a break and walk a little bit. So I think that's probably a more of an individual decision, but yeah. Quick thing that I need to point out here before we go a little farther, and our listeners probably have asked this question. It's like, we've talked so much about cadence, and this is such an awesome concept, but such an awesome subject. But they're asking like, well, why is this important? Why is it important that you can pedal at a faster RPM? We talked about the demands of the event, but, and Leadville is unique in that you've got both, right? You've got to have strength. You've got to have this ability to do what the Italian coach says, the grind for a long time. And then you've got to pedal quickly for a long time. So you've got to be able to match the event demands. But I want to also point out that pedaling at a slow RPM and using more muscular strength uses more muscle glycogen. Okay, glycogen is the stored energy, the stored glucose in our muscles. And so by using more force, more strength on the pedals, we use more of that glycogen. Okay, so what that does is that, gosh, you've only got about 2.5 hours of that stored in your body between your liver and your muscles. And so you want to preserve that. And so by pedaling at a faster RPM, you're preserving more of that muscle glycogen because you're not using the strength component. You've shifted to the cardiovascular component. So that's not really, that uses glycogen, of course, but not muscle glycogen. All right. That's using more of the liver releasing it into the bloodstream. And then that's using that system. So that's an important important part of this. And, we see it often. I also coach triathletes and a lot of triathletes will ride at 80 RPM for their Ironman. And then they get to the run and they can't finish the run, or they're walking on the run. And it's the same reason. They pedaled too slowly with too high of a force on the bike. They blown all their muscle glycogen out, and now they can't run, and they're getting calf cramps. The calf muscles are glycogen hogs. I mean, they use more glycogen, kind of, I don't know what the correct term is, per square centimeter or whatever, than the other leg muscles do. So we want to preserve that. And that's one of the things, the reason why you want to be able to pedal at a faster RPM. Now, if you got an hour and a half race, doesn't matter, right? Because hour and a half, you can blow it out and it doesn't matter, right? But Leadville is not an hour and a half race. You've got to save for those last hour, 2 hours.
Yep, the Leadville athlete will pedal their bike tens of thousands of times throughout this event. So it's, I'm glad we finally got to the topic, Fatty. It's one we have somewhat overlooked, but geez, it's the most basic of cycling, a part of cycling, and we should probably focus on a little bit more. So, Coach Hunter, here's to good pedaling. Thanks for all your advice on this topic, and we hope that we can do our low cadence drills, our high cadence drills, and come to Leadville fully equipped.
Excellent. Glad to help.
Fatty, one more thing on cadence. Obviously, we can monitor it using the data on our head unit, but if you need a little help holding a higher cadence, try using music. You want to use beats per minute, or BPM, to achieve your RPM. To do that, you take your goal cadence and double it, then find a song to match. So for instance, this song is 180 beats per minute, and that should help hold a cadence of about 90 RPM.
I love it. Of course, you can't use music during the race, but that is a great tip for getting used to that cadence in training so it feels natural on race day.
Thanks again, Coach Hunter Allen of Peaks Coaching Group. Coach Allen will be back with us later this season to help us get our power meters dialed for race day. Our Slack channel conversations are picking up again, so get on over there and find or start a discussion and get your Leadville going. Check it out at leadville.fm/Slack. If you like the show, go to wherever you listen and give us a 5-star rating. Write a review. To see all the ways you can find this independent show, it's leadville.fm.
Good luck in your Leadville pedaling and your planning. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you real soon at the starting line.